Hello, Morgane. Thank you for coming to join us today. It's so good to have you. And I want to start as we do in this context with introducing you to the audience. And some of them obviously know you, and some of them don't. And I like to read it anyways, just to, because it's so beautiful. Morgane Michael is a passionate, transformative educator, author, speaker, podcaster, and personal coach who champions wellness, combats burnout, and cultivates purposeful living with simple yet powerful strategies. As a practicing, excuse me, guys, as a practicing kindergarten teacher, and busy mom of two in Victoria, Canada, with a rich 16-year background in education, Morgane has evolved her passion beyond the classroom, guiding individuals and organizations towards thriving in wellness and resilience. As the force behind the Small Act, Big Impact Kindness Initiative and the KindSight 101 podcast. She's a pioneer in personal and corporate wellness, delivering impactful insights and fostering environments of healthy morale, kindness, and positivity.
Thank you, Tchera.
Thank you, Morgane.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can see all this in your presence already, in your beautiful smile and your presence. It's kind of already delivering all this passionate kindness and wellness. And I want to start with an idea that I always have in mind, that it's always cooking in my lab of my body, which is this Hebrew word, which is one word for teaching and learning at the same time. I find this so encompassing, because without the teaching there is no learning, and without the giving no receiving. It's such a reciprocity, and once we find that balance, it's a beautiful place to be. And so I want to start with that. How is it that you keep learning, and how is it that you design your life so that when you're 8 years old and when you're 80 years old, you're still one being that has a continuity, that has the thread of wellness and sovereignty and beauty that you can be confident about? Tell us.
It's such a good question. I don't know that I ever feel like I have the answer, and maybe that's part of it. And I love that question of making your 8-year-old self proud and your 80-year-old self proud. And I think that that guides me a lot. When I think about the person that I want to be, I do really, really value learning. And I think that there are so many modalities for learning, as we know as educators. So some of those things are visual, some of those things are auditory, some of those things are moving and embodying a learning, in a physical way. And I think what guides me usually when I am at my most fulfilled or most wholehearted self is the values that I have. And so I've done a lot of work on values. And when I do professional development with educators or with corporate folks, I tend to really dig into values when we work on goal setting. And the reason that I do that is because deep down, there's sort of this essence of who we are. And it's very much rooted in what we believe about the world, our context, what we want to learn about the world. And when we can drill it down to one or two values, it's a very powerful thing, because then we can close out a lot of what doesn't matter. It's almost like a filter. And the more you can drill down to what matters, the more intentional you can be about your life. The more intentional you are, the less you're living it for other people. And I think one of the biggest root causes of burnout is that we live life for other people and we forget that actually our own trajectory and our own values and that really important curiosity that we have about the world, that thing, that impetus that makes us want to learn, that is what kind of wards off burnout. And if we can dig into that a little bit more, it's a beautiful place to be. And I'm not sure that all of us get to do that in a very intentional way. And so that's the work that I love to do and dig into with people. And so I'd say the key to learning is getting really clear on what your values are, what makes you tick, what excites you, not apologizing for it, not explaining it to anyone else. And then with a sense of curiosity in your heart, going after it. And as a busy mom, as a busy teacher, as someone who fills my calendar with dates and speaking and keynotes and all that, obviously we have to be very, very clear about what we say yes to and what we say no to. But if our values are clear, then we can be very, very intentional about the way that we spend our time. So I think that's a broad approach to answering your question, but that's what guides me when it comes to learning.
Yes, it gives me the impression of a compass. And I have a little story. You were asking me just before we hit the record about the painting behind me by one of my teachers, Sangchen Somo. When I first saw this picture, I asked her, "What is she holding? Is that a compass?" And she said, "Yeah, if you'd like it to be." And then I said, what is it for you? What did you make it to be? And she said, "Oh, it's a paintbrush." And so yeah, so that's like if you like it to be, that's your values of compass. And if you like it to be a paintbrush, if that's your, it's such a and when you were telling about this, something that came to my mind was again, it seems like a crossroads, a crossing section of where the proudness may go wire or not. It's just like a fine point, because I find that as work martyrs, further along even on the road of burnout, I have certainly kind of confused the idea of giving of oneself without any expecting to receive back as a lofty thing, as a spiritual even way of being. And then once you've crossed the line, it's really not, it's not at all. So there's a pride in that also.
Yeah.
How do we define when we've gone a little too, and how is it that we still have to cultivate the giving without the expectation of receiving? Because without the expectation of receiving, that's not really giving either, is it?
Yeah.
Because if
No.
we're calculating, what am I going to get back from this?
No, it's not.
That's not really giving. Yeah.
So many ways to go with this. So I'm going to start, first of all, with the research. So the research says that there's something chemical, we have these 4 chemicals that are basically happiness chemicals. When we give, when we receive a kindness, or when we receive generosity, and when we witness it. So say you're on a bus or something and you see someone being kind. All of these things elicit these 4 chemicals: oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. So all 4 of those fire off in your brain. The wonderful thing about this is not only does that elevate our mood and we get what we call a happiness high, but it also counteracts and blocks the cortisol hormone, which is directly responsible for stress. So the more that we see kindness, the more that we surround ourselves with generosity, the more that we take it upon ourselves to create a generous workplace or any of those things through our own actions, the happier we are and the less stressed out we are. However, and there's research, with Dr. Adam Grant, he wrote a book called Give and Take. And this book was remarkable because, and he speaks about this in his TED Talk also, because he said that the most successful people in the world are givers, And also the least successful people in the world are givers. And there's some in-between people. So there are takers, and then there are people who match. And the matchers are the ones who go, if you give for me, then I'll give for you. It's sort of conditional on other people's actions. Not sure that's exactly the way to be either. And Dr. Grant said there's one difference between the two, the two givers on the spectrum. And the ones that are the most successful have one common element, and it differentiates them from the other givers. And that is the fact that they have boundaries. So they have created a set of boundaries, or call them guideposts, whatever you want to call them. Some people don't like the word boundary because it's charged and it's loaded. But essentially, you have a set of rules, guideposts, something that determines to what degree you're going to give. And I always think giving is kind of like lending money. You only give it up to the point that you can stand to lose it. And so maybe that's a funny way to describe it. But I think my biggest tell when I've given too much is that there's a sense of resentment deep in my heart. I can feel this little feeling of resentment, and it's not a place that I like to be very often, but I've felt it before. And that is the canary in the gold mine that says you've gone too far, you're giving too much, and you're not receiving enough. And to a degree, relationships are meant to be reciprocal. But I don't believe in this, you give for me, I give for you thing. Sometimes you can get different things from different people. And so I'd say pay attention to the resentment, because for most of us givers, when we feel that sense of resentment, that's the point at which we can sort of say, oh, I got to pull back a bit. Now, how do we pull back, or how do we create those things? So again, I think creating a sense of really strong values, one or two. And then the second piece is asking some questions. So there's a framework when you're engaged in a particular activity or project or something, where you can ask yourself two questions. So this kind of helps you to discern whether you want to keep going. And sometimes people say quitting is a bad thing, but it's not. I really believe that quitting allows you to, again, zero in on what's important, be intentional, and put your energy where it's important, 2 or 3 buckets, not 25. And so you ask yourself, 1, is it working? And then 2, do I love it? And if the answer is no to both, you got to either quit or change quite a few things. Sometimes the answer is, yes, I love it, but it's not working. So then you have to find a way to kind of negotiate that so that it works. Or maybe the answer is, I hate it, but it's working. Can you outsource some of that? Can you change it so that you get to do more of the pieces that fill your heart up? And then maybe ask someone else to take another piece of that if you're a team, so there's ways to sort of drill down beyond just, I'm done with this, and kind of go, what part do I love? What part's working? What's not working? And it's sort of a framework that helps as well. The other piece is also really auditing. Who are you spending time with? Are those people filling you up? Do you have similar values? Do you have a similar trajectory? Are you surrounded by people that you're constantly helping all the time? In which case, you really need to take a look at who are the people who do fill me up, and have a concerted effort to spend more time with those people. So I guess it's kind of about auditing and editing your life a little bit, kind of going, where am I? In my book, I talk a lot about reflecting. Where am I right now? And then editing that. What do I need to change? And sometimes it's just little tweaks. So in a sense, that's kind of what I would do. That's kind of where I would really be careful around giving too much. But there are ways that we can do it where we can absolutely give of ourselves. But then there's always kind of that trigger point that goes, too much. And then you honor and respect that, because that's called self-discipline and that's called self-love. And so that's an important piece.
Beautiful. I love those 2 questions. Is it working? Is really number 1 question for me. Is it working?
Mm-hmm.
If it's working, that's really, for us workaholics especially, I think it's really key question. And then we forget sometimes, I do I love it? Because I kind of drive, even if I'm not really loving it. And that kind of correlates to if it's not working. If I'm not loving it, it's not really working. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will say, in terms of workaholism, I don't really believe in balance. And I think I think there are seasons. This is a bit off topic, but we'll do it, right? I
Okay.
think this is important.
Yes.
I think that we have times where we have seasons of deep rest, and we have seasons where we need to push really hard and maybe right to the brink of what we feel capable of. And I think sometimes we are sold a message, especially in the wellness world, that we need to be even keeled and monotone in our energies. And I don't adhere to that. I don't believe that. And I don't really think that that's how we work as human beings. Some of us might, but the consistent effort for me is always maybe a goal. But I do find myself sometimes in sprint mode or sometimes in slow marathon mode. And it really, I think some of it is, some of the trouble can come up when we want to push ourselves into one particular mode and it's not fitting where we want to be. And that idea of saying, oh, I should be doing X, Y, and Z, or I should be behaving in this way, or I should want this, that can get us into trouble. So if you find that you're sometimes in hustle mode or you're in sprint mode and you're like, oh my gosh, I should be more balanced, or I should be more putting more energy into this bucket and I'm not, kind of take a step back and go, but am I pushing forward because this is meaningful, important work with a timeline that really doesn't have a lot of give? And if I want to succeed at that, I need to push. I think that sometimes we need to do that. But we also then have to take the foot off that gas pedal when we've completed that season and go, hey, it's okay to sit and it's okay to just be for a little bit. And it's okay to give myself some deep rest. And so that's a piece that's important too.
That's really, really important. Thank you for that point, because to me it's the difference between balance and the balancing act. It's a balancing act, which is a dynamic that we're constantly dancing with, as opposed to, okay, now I got it, I've got the bell. That's static, and then we're kind of fooling ourselves really with that work-life balance thing. Where's that line? Where do I end and life begin? Yeah, it's a really important point. Thank you for that. So yeah, we didn't talk about your book, which is actually, we went into some of it, but I didn't mention it, that you have this book. The title is From Burnt Out to Fired Up. It's such a beautiful, the title itself is already kind of gives us the feeling of it's like you could make it almost instantly, just like how I perceive Play Mind. It sounds like that's the juxtapose of Play Mind and just switching the thing from fired up to burnt out. Can you talk about a little with Play Mind? How do you get into this way of being?
Yeah, of course. So within that context, ultimately, there are 5 pillars in my book. So the first, and I'll just kind of quickly give you a synopsis. So the first is reflect. So take stock of where you are, and a lot of mindfulness activities. So we can dig deeper if you want. Reframing. So now that we know where we've come from and we've had a chance to sort of take stock, what maladaptive narratives do we have about our past, about our current situation, perhaps limiting beliefs that prevent us from going forward? What can we say? Yes, I want to keep that narrative, and no, I don't want to associate my identity with this particular narrative. And you can sort of take stock in many different ways and then create new narratives for yourself. The next piece is about refocusing. So now that you know where you've come from, now that you know what's held you back a little bit, now you can focus forward to a compelling future. So this is about the goal setting, the values work, what makes you come alive? What are those things that excited you when you were 7 years old, and how can you pull that into your life now? Because quite frankly, what I see when I look at people who have been very successful is they're coming back to some of the things that they used to do on their free time when they were little kids. And there's something, and talk about Play Mind, there's something very, I always think everything's information. So for me, for example, I used to have a writing club when I was in 2nd grade. And I used to drag all my friends over to come and write with me. And I'd look back and I'm like, I don't think that's normal. I don't think most kids did that. And then I wanted to write a book. And then I also used to do these self-development seminars when I was in 11th grade for the 8th grade girls. And we would come together, and it was this beautiful experience. And so, all of these things are like clues that get you to where you want to go. The fourth pillar is called reconnect. So now that you've kind of got this important framework, how do you deeply connect with the people around you in a meaningful way? For two reasons. One, there's so much research around, we kind of become the 5 people that we spend the most time with. So be discerning. If you spend time with people who are always needing of you and you're not kind of being replenished by those people, it's important to sort of take stock and go, I want to be filled up. I want to be around people who are smarter than I am, who are doing creative things that I've never even thought of doing before. Like, how inspiring, And the other important piece about the connection, or the social fitness piece, is that being connected is the number one determinant of our longevity and our health as human beings. So if we surround ourselves with 1 or 2 or 10 people who really care for us, who know us deeply, we have a chance of living longer, of living a more healthy, fulfilled life. And so that's important too, is really being honest with ourselves about that human piece. And then finally, reveal. Reveal is really a different approach to burnout. But essentially what it is once you've gotten to this place, I suppose it's kind of like self-actualization. I really think that creativity is our truest human form of self-expression. And so creativity, people often think about like art, like the painting behind you, for example. But I think about creativity in the way that we solve problems, in the way that we greet people at the door, in the way that we attack a new recipe for dinner, the way that we live life with grace and curiosity in our heart. I think that that's what it's about. So the reveal chapter is about exploring novelty and play and allowing that to kind of guide who we are in this world. And so it's been a really fun, beautiful book project to work on with people. And I think all of those pillars weave together. And sometimes people want to focus more on certain areas, but when you put all of those things together, you can come out just a little bit more wholehearted, with more direction and with more intention in your heart. So that's essentially what the book's about.
Yeah, beautiful. I would love to tackle some of those. I want to start with what you call social fitness. That's a beautiful way to put it. I'm a big believer in tuning with more advanced, more evolved being than myself, looking up to someone so that I can tune myself better, which is key. Those 5 people, even one person in our life who is, who has gone farther in our evolvement, makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're receiving from that source of being. And so tell us more about this reconnectedness. How do we find, and that's where that's also where it's a tricky point I want to also bring in about hierarchy. We have talked with some of the other speakers about how in the nature of things, in the nature of the mind, there is no hierarchy, which is, yes, no superior, or there's no hierarchy at all, which is, so true. And there's also beings who are more evolved than we are. That's the natural law. So it's so important to be able to find something to look up to learn from, to receive from, which is which is the teacher-student relationship in all of its aspects.
Yeah.
So tell us more about this social, how did you call it? Social fitness.
Social fitness. Yes. Okay. So I look at this in many different ways. It's so interesting that you talk about hierarchy, because while we don't want it to exist, we still exist within the context of, humanity. And naturally, there's a siphoning and a distilling of people. And a lot of that is status and power. And you get status and power in many different ways, depending on what group you walk in. And so, say if you're in the military, you can come in and say as much as you want that there's no hierarchy, but within that context of that social grouping, there sure is. And so while you may have, a doctorate degree within the context of that organization, it's not as important as being, a top level officer, for example. So it's interesting because there's different rules for different social circles. And so I'd say the most accessible point if you are someone who is interested in elevating your thoughts and your belief systems, I'd say you can choose a mentor that you may never meet. We live in this beautiful time where we have access to people who will interact with us to a point, whether it's us just receiving what they're talking about in conversation. But I think about podcasts, I think about audiobooks, I think about books themselves, I think about, the many YouTube videos that are out there with really interesting people, and choose one or two people who you look at their life and you go, wow, I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by their viewpoints. I'm inspired by the way that they live their life. I think if we can even drill into that a little bit more, that's huge. And I think that's some of the influence that I've had. And it's funny because the more that you listen to some of those ideas, the more you get exposed to new people and new ideas. And I think largely it's about being curious. They say don't be the most interesting person, be the most interested. And so I think if you start that way and you start to listen and expose yourself to lots of different ideas, the truth is you're going to start connecting in real time with people who are very similar to that. And I found that in my own experience. I'd say join, again, coming down. So joining groups that are doing things that interest you. That's another really great way to build that. So, for example, I listen to Seth Godin's podcast. He's quite a well-known marketer. He's written more than 20 books that were bestsellers. And back in 2018, he decided that he was going to launch a podcast fellowship. And I took a chance and I joined this fellowship. And it was one of the most remarkable experiences of my life, because I met all of these people who were scrappy podcast artists too, who didn't know what they were doing. But in this community, we were able to connect with one another. We were able to coach each other. We were able to encourage each other. And we really got to know Seth Godin himself. So there was a certain level of accessibility. After that, he asked me to be a coach, and we stayed connected, and he's been a true mentor to me. But for a long time, he was someone who was not accessible to me in any way. And I had never dreamed that I would actually meet him and that he would know who I was. So you might surprise yourself. And the more that you do things that scare you a little bit, just a little bit, I think the more that you can sort of grow. And that connection point, that community is usually where it comes from. And then when you kind of come down to more of a social level, I like the question asking, are you proud of the trail that you're leaving behind? So when you interact with people, whether it's an administrative assistant, a janitor, a manager in an organization, are you proud of the way that you've interacted? Do you feel like you left them better off or the same, not worse? I think that that's a huge measuring stick too. Being able to connect to our peers, and a lot of that comes down to also recognition. People have this funny skewed idea that they're recognizing people, and yet when you take it, and this really comes down, the research comes down to the hierarchy, but within the workplace, for example, many people who are working in an organization don't believe that they're getting the recognition that they deserve. And conversely, most of the managers believe that they are giving more than enough recognition. So there's this recognition gap that exists. And if we can close the gap a bit by being more intentional about the way that we give positive feedback, the ratio is about 5-1. So if you're giving critical feedback, you want to make sure that you offset that in some way with 5 positive interactions. So that could be a smile or a wave or just an acknowledgement. But if you only give critical feedback, it can have a way of dampening down in the workplace environment. But as peers, we can also have an impact on that. So even writing a little sticky note on your colleague's computer and just saying, I saw the way that you suggested this new way of doing things in the meeting, and I was pretty courageous, and thank you for doing that because it was on my mind too. Or just something as simple as, I hope you're having a great day. I was thinking about you yesterday, and I'm just so grateful to have you in my life. And sometimes that can feel stilted, but the more that you do it, the less stilted it feels. One of the other exercises that I like to do with people is a gratitude text challenge. So this is something that I often suggest, and there's a 2-for-1 with this. So basically what I say is I say, choose a colleague or choose a friend that you want to do this with. And for the next 7 days, text them one good thing that happened. And you don't have to have a precursor conversation or anything. And what it serves to do is connects you with that person. And then it also kind of helps you to scan your environment for those positive things. And then you share that every day. And it's a beautiful practice. So that's one of the strategies that I often tell people to try. And it's fun and lighthearted and a connector.
Is this part of your 21-day challenge of kindness? I was curious about that.
Yeah, so the 21-day challenge grew, it was actually pre-COVID. So it was around 2018, and there was a lot of new research coming out. And there was research around habit forming. And so this idea that it takes approximately 21 days to form a new habit. And to me, and subsequently, a lot of 21-day challenges around kindness have come out, including Lady Gaga's. I don't think it was because of me, but I think this idea of melding the two was quite popular. And the idea behind it is just, if we can just be a bit intentional for 3 weeks around doing kind things, being kind, showing our colleagues and friends and family more recognition for what it is that they're doing, that we can kind of create this habit of looking outside of ourselves a little bit and serving, and I think we can do that in easy ways, but sometimes it just takes a little kickstart. And so, yeah, some of those things were texting a friend. Sometimes it was, leave a little extra money maybe on a corner that someone can find, buy someone a coffee behind you, leave someone a note, offer to watch someone's kids if they're really busy, do things like this, cook someone a meal and just drop off the extras for them, cook some muffins or whatever it is. And it's just little things like that can just put a smile on somebody's face. And when I also do in my seminars, I usually tell people, and actually you might want to do this right now, is to text someone that you haven't spoken to for a while, who means a lot to you, that you're like, oh, everybody's got that person, right? I've really got to connect with that person. And take a moment and just text them an out of the blue text saying, I know I don't always tell you, but I want you to know that I appreciate you as a friend, as a family member. I deeply cherish our relationship and you mean the world to me. Just something like that. And just about every time, two things happen. One is, are you into the margaritas at 9 a.m. on a on a professional development day, is the question. Or you have somebody, like one of my session participants who told me that her friend immediately texted back. She was on the runway about to take off to go and see her ailing mother, who had just, received news that she was terminal and really didn't have long. And in that moment, she's like, and it gives me chills, really, honestly. In that moment, she felt so lost, so devastated. And she just seeing that message meant the world. And so, we just never know the timing of that and how beautiful that is. And sometimes we just need to say it, and not everybody does all the time. And there's something really beautiful that cements that relationship. So yeah, that's one of the activities I do.
Yeah. And please tell us also some of these activities that we can receive to turn it back inwards. How do we turn it also back inwards? Because as driven people, we might think we might be in a place where I don't have time to text even, which actually is giving to oneself. It's like one of the things my teacher says, do the thing and leave the credit. We're not doing it for credit. Do the thing, do the work, and don't take the credit, which kind of makes the giving and receiving one thing. And when we are not in that space, how can we do this as we forget for ourselves? Just in one moment, maybe. How can we text ourselves?
Yes. So, okay, a few different things. I'd say number one is your physiology. So like, drink a glass of water. Number one. Drink a big glass of water. Make sure that you've got some food in you that's nutritious, that's got some protein in it, that's going to feed your brain and your soul. Make sure that you're eating the food that you need to be healthy. So the physiology, you're sleeping well as much as you can. One of my favorite exercises that I like to do is is to sort of take your own temperature. And so to slow down, there's a few different things that we can do. I love the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise. And I've done it actually with my daughter when she's had a big spin out and she's having a big emotional moment, and she just needs to ground herself physiologically. So you might be familiar with this, but maybe it's a reminder. So you would lift out loud 5 things that you can see. And so you would do that right now, 5 things that you can see. And if you're watching this, maybe pause the video and do it right now. Say it out loud or write it down. Saying it out loud, the research shows that it's more poignant for your physiology. Next, you're going to do 4 things that you can hear, and then 3 things that you can feel in your body. So for example, the back of the chair on my back, my hair on my neck right now, maybe if you're outside, a cool breeze. Then you're going to have 2 things that you can smell, and then finally 1 thing that you can taste. And so just doing that is actually a strategy that many people will use if they are having a panic attack, because it will bring them back into their physiology and into the present. So often we are either thinking forward or thinking back, and being able to come into the present really quickly is a helpful strategy. And no one even needs to know that you're doing it. So you could be at the grocery store and you could be doing this when you're feeling escalated. Another beautiful thing about that strategy is that it anchors memories in a physiological way. So I'll tell you an example. I was in Hawaii, I think in 2018 or 2017. And I remember, it was really busy with my kids and I just needed a moment. And I went down to the beach and I did this exercise. And when I think back to that particular trip, I can close my eyes, and because I've anchored it in all the ways, including my sense, the way that I smelled my environment, it's almost like if I'm there. So when we think about pulling gratitude moments, what this particular 5-4-3-2-1 exercise does is it anchors it so that we have a Rolodex of beautiful moments for which we can be grateful. And sometimes it's hard to pull those out. So that's one of the strategies that I use that can calm us, but it can also have this wonderful positive benefit as well. Another strategy that is great is also just a deep breathing exercise. It's called a physiological sigh. So there's a lot of research around this too, because the way that it helps us to kind of pull in as much oxygen as possible and then expunge it helps us to get rid of as much CO2 as possible. So what we do is we take a big deep breath in through our nose, and then we actually fill up just a little bit more, and then we release it. So the idea is that you're filling those alveoli, those little air sacs, as much as possible through that double inhale, and then releasing it. And there's a lot of research that says and supports the fact that that's actually, it will immediately reduce stress. It's that same thing that little kids do when they've been crying uncontrollably, and then they're going, that feeling, or you see it when your dog's sleeping on the floor. So it's just sort of it's called the physiological sigh. And that's a very, very calming thing that we can do for ourselves that can ground us just for a moment.
Yeah. And it's so simple, and sometimes how we think simple is not so effective, and so simple, and it is a lifetime practice, I think, just to really do this.
Yes,
it makes a difference, and
it does.
That alone is already super effective. And how we forget.
Yes. Sometimes too, I take people through a stressor inventory as well to get to drill down a bit more to some of the things that can stress us out. When we think of resiliency, and that's part of that reframing section, we want to have 3 things. We want to have a sense of control over the environment. We want to have a commitment to a different future or a different sort of existence. And then we also want to look at a challenge, not as a challenge that's insurmountable, but as something that we can overcome. And so sometimes it's about anchoring ourselves and realizing we have control over certain elements of our stressors. Not everything, but we can drill down to maybe we have cognitive stressors, Or maybe we have things in our physical environment like clutter or something that needs to be decreased so that we can feel a bit more calm. Or maybe we're really sensitive to sound. So we need to give ourselves, 5 minutes of quiet time before we merge from the workplace to our family life. There's very simple things, but again, it comes down to taking stock, auditing, and then going, okay, what can I do about it? That locus of control. What's within my control? What's outside of it? And if we can really think about those stressors in that context, then there's actually a lot that we can do. And when we do those micro changes and we build on those micro habits, there's something that happens in our brain that goes, oh, I can have efficacy over my life. And when a human being feels that, it's a very powerful, empowering feeling to have. And so a lot of that stress and burnout can come from being stuck in a tunnel of feeling like you don't have control. And so all of the maladaptive things that we do to try and clutch back a sense of control, we can start to do that in a very intentional way if we look at those stressors in a calm headspace and go, what can I change?
The way that I like to think about exactly what you're saying is to do my best, and the results are not in my control. So I do my best, and then what is the outcome? That's where the relaxation comes. I've done what I can, and that's what I can control. I'm finding also that this conversation about being in the present, something that is very commonly talked about. However, thus I have heard that there is really no being in the present either. Just as there is no being in the future, there's no being in the past, and there is no being in the present, because you can't really be in the present because the present is constantly moving. The moment that you think you're in the present, you're actually already not. Right? So it's not catchable, it's not graspable, it's something mysterious that we cannot know. So how would you bring this with PlayMind to close for us, and anything else that you would like to close with?
Yeah, I think maybe a certain level of surrender and understanding that maybe we don't need to always be completely in control. Maybe sometimes we need to be curious more instead of trying to mold, as much as I believe in intention. Sometimes we need to throw our hands up and go, well, that's much different than what I anticipated. And when we think about clutching or hanging on or gripping onto a certain idea of any kind, we sort of lose ourselves in that and the beauty of humanity. And I would agree. I think when we're so focused on kind of this metacognition around ourselves or our state of being, that we lose something in that. We lose the opportunity, even. We're so sort of focused on ourselves. We lose the opportunity to really just take in whatever's happening. And that's where so much beautiful connection happens. I think when you can just allow life to take you where it's meant to be. And maybe that's part of it, is trusting yourself. And that's not always an easy thing to do, but if you can trust yourself to make the right decisions for you every step of the way, if you can trust that things, and I don't mean this in a woo-woo way, but that you're going to find your feet, even if it feels like you're in deep darkness or you're in a place that feels foggy. I speak to people all the time who are in the depths of divorce, or they're struggling to sort of work through deep grief with things. And that's a very human feeling, to feel this feeling of loss and darkness. And I think if we can kind of release ourselves from any expectation of how we're supposed to be working through that, and be as much as we can curious about the process, and have some kind of core belief that you will land on your feet, this trust in yourself that you have got everything that it takes to land on your feet, because you're a resourceful, beautiful, creative human being. And that's all you need. You don't need anything else. And I think the more that we unbecome who we think we're supposed to be, the more we can trust kind of that ability to find your path, to find the way that's right for you. So that's what I would say is sort of trust and then release a little bit,
Beautifully said. Thank
Mm,
you. Thank you, Morgane. Thank you,
thank
everyone.
you. Thank you,
You,
Tchera.
everyone. Yeah. And you have a free gift. Let's not forget about that because we want to go
Yes.
and grab it. Yes. What is it?
Yes.
Tell us, please.
Yes. So I have a free workbook that goes with my course, but you can actually dig into all of these concepts. So what it has is it has a whole bunch of helpful PDF guidance just around tuning into where you're at right now. I've got some really beautiful guided reflection exercises and journal exercises. I've got a goal setting template as well as a values exercise, which is amazing. And so hopefully we can link that in here and send it along to people because it's free and it's useful. And I know so many people have spoken to me and reached out and said that it has helped them just to create a bit of just a framework for where they want to go. And so there's some really helpful strategies within the package.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tchera.
Thank you.